Now that we have the structure of our web page created, the next thing I want to do is focus on the styles, and this is going to be a project where we're going to see CSS do a lot of work and really change this from a pretty gross layout to something nice. You'll notice I also added in the clicker game here just so we have a little bit more content, because it's going to be hard to tell what some of our CSS rules are doing if you don't add on one more piece. So just like we did up here, go ahead and add on another div to your project with another game in it, or just an empty one right now, just so you can see what these elements are doing. So all of the work we're going to do today is in the styles, and styles, if you remember, are part of the head. And everything between the opening style tag and the closing style tag is in another language called CSS. And CSS is used to create styling rules for our web page. So for example, if we want everything on our web page to be centered, which I actually do, we can say something like body, the name of the tag in the HTML. And then we can say we want all the elements in the body to be aligned to the center. Text align center. And then save it and refresh, and everything in your project will move over to the center. The next thing I want to do is style our images, because they're currently much too big and they won't even fit inside the divs the way I want them to. And so I'm going to say img and open close curly brace, and then inside this we're going to put the rules for images are going to be, we're going to set their width to be equal to 350 pixels, and you guys can pick whatever values you want here, but I think their width and height for mine are going to be 350 and 300 pixels. And what this is going to do is it's going to force all the images on our page into that size, and that's really important because we need all of our images to be a consistent size, otherwise they're going to make our divs show up like too big or too small on our web page, and that would look pretty gross. Now that our images are set up to fit on our page, the next thing we need to do is style the divs. So remember, the divs are what is surrounding basically these three elements on the page. For each one of our projects, we have a div surrounding them, right? We have the div right here, and then under the div, we have each of these elements inside of the div. And so when we style the div, we're sort of also styling everything inside of it. So when I create a rule for a div and I say something like, I want to set all the divs widths to be equal to 400 pixels, and refresh, you'll see all the elements will now conform to the rule of 400 pixels because all these elements are inside the div, and the div was told to be 400 pixels, therefore everything in the element gets shrunk down so it fits within the div. Just so you know, that is not true for images. For instance, if I set my image to be 550 pixels, it would get bigger even though the div is only 400 pixels. That's a quirk of images in CSS that you need to keep in mind, but usually if you shrink a div, all the content on the page will shrink with the div. One really helpful thing with divs is sometimes it can be hard to tell where they actually are on the page. It's really useful to add a border to them, and they also look nice. So we're going to go ahead and throw in a border with 1 pixel solid gray. And when I refresh this, I'm going to make that a little bigger actually, let's go 2 pixels. Now you can actually see the div element show up on the page. It's everything inside this gray box. Right now these two projects are stacked on top of each other, and I don't really like that look because they have plenty of space. They could just fit right next to each other. The way we're going to fix that is by changing the display of these divs, how they show up on the page. And so we're going to type the CSS rule display, colon, and then we're going to say inline block, which is going to make them still be blocks, but it's going to make them show up on the same line whenever they can. So now we have them come next to each other. All the divs will try to fit next to each other. If they can't, then they'll show up at the bottom of the page. And I'll add another project on the end to show you what that kind of looks like, but they're going to try to fit all next to each other. We also want to specify the height of the div, and you might be thinking, well, why is that important? Because these two divs actually look like they are the same height, and it's true, they are the same height, but that's just because they happen to use the same number of lines of space for the text. If I deleted some of this text, like this, and saved it and refreshed it, you'd see suddenly we'd have one of these divs is smaller than the other, and that looks very weird. So we're going to go ahead and set the height for them as well. And I'm going to set it to 500 pixels again. It depends on how many words you have, how much you want to set that to, but 500 should give you a little bit of space to work with. I'm also going to change the border radius to be rounded. So if we say border radius and then we give it a number of pixels, it'll sort of round out these corners, which I just like the effect of better. I'd also like to set their background color so that the background color of the divs is a little different and it stands out from the rest of the page. So now they're kind of a different color. And then I think the last thing I want to do with these divs is I'd like them to space out from each other a little more, because right now they are very, very close to each other. I'd also like a little bit more space between the border and the text so that this text is kind of pushed in a little bit and not so like right on the border here. The way we do that is by using some rules we haven't talked about yet, and one of those rules is margin. And what margin does is move things away from each other. It moves elements further away from each other. It adds space on the outside of the element. So we're talking space like out here, like along this side. If I save and refresh this, what you're going to see is everything, it's going to put more space between these elements on every side. So if I refresh it, now there's a little bit more space at the top, there's a little more space on the side. You can't tell, but there is also a little more space on the bottom. And it sort of gives me a little bit of breathing room. And you can adjust these values however you want. I might make them, no, not quite that big. I think like maybe 15 for mine. I like that look. And it gives us just a little bit of space. The other thing is padding, and padding is giving space between the edge of the element, so like the edge here, the border here, and the stuff inside of the element, so everything inside of the div. So you'll see if we set padding equal to 10 pixels, and I refresh the page, you're going to see all of the text get pushed in a little bit more. And I'm actually going to make that number a little bit bigger too. I think that'll look better at 15. That's looking a lot better, and I think that's all the styling we have to do for a div. There's plenty else you could add here. I'd also like to add on a little styling for the P, just because I think the text of the paragraph is a little small. All my paragraphs are kind of small. So I'm going to change them to font size 1.2 EM. And if I refresh this, now when I did that, you'll notice something kind of strange happened. It offset our items from each other a little bit when I increased the size. The way to fix that is we've lined everything up in the center of our page. We've centered all of our items here with text line center, but we also need to align them vertically within our divs. So we want to make all these elements appear at the same vertical height. And to do that, you would say vertical, align, and then you would say top. And there we go. We have everything on our web page lined up to be the center. We have all of our divs vertical aligned to the top, so all the content goes to the top. We have a specified height and width. We have our borders, our radius. We're displayed inline blocks, so they're next to each other. And we also have our margin and padding. Margin adding space between the different elements of the div, on the outsides of the div adding space, and padding adding space on the inside so that these words aren't right up against the border. Now I'm going to uncomment this other line I put in here to show you what this looks like when they go onto another line. And if I refresh this, you'll see I also added in the portfolio project, and it will show up on the next line. If I had another project, it'd show up next to the portfolio project here, and the portfolio project would move over, and it'd look like this top line. As you make your window bigger, you'll notice that when they have space, they'll come line up next to each other, like that. And as you shrink it, it'll get smaller. So this should look good, actually, across most devices. This will look pretty nice. Should look good on your phone. You can actually see how a web page looks on your phone if you right-click and say Inspect. Up here at the top right of your screen, there's this toggle device toolbar. And if you click on it, it'll show you what it looks like on different phones. So we could say maybe the Galaxy S5 or, you know, an iPad. What does it look like on an iPad? And that's what it looks like on those screens, which is very useful to know if you're an actual web developer and you need to make things that look good on phones as well as computers. And if you want to turn that off, you just go over here and toggle the device toolbar again, and you come back into your main screen. That's all you need to create a basic portfolio page. Now, I'm not a graphic designer, and I strongly encourage you to go your own route with this. Add your own colors, make your own designs, find your own pictures, and, you know, even change up the layout. I've showed you how to use these divs, but you can put whatever you want in them. For instance, maybe you think all of your projects should have a completion date on them as well. That'd be a pretty useful thing to add, actually, like when you finish the project. So feel free to move around all of the different parts of the div, all the parts of the web page. Make this your own portfolio site. You know, add more images. You could maybe add a profile image for yourself. All sorts of directions you could take this project. But that's the basics of how to create a portfolio website. I hope you guys had some fun and learned something from that, and I will see you in the next project.